D.O.S.E is an acronym for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins.
Today, we're joined by TJ Power, a neuroscientist whose research into brain chemistry has transformed how over 75,000 people approach productivity, focus, and mental well-being.
The most important thing to understand about dopamine is it basically was designed to make us do hard things and make that experience feel good.
He's also the author of The D.O.S.E Effect. At just 27 years old, he's built the D.O.S.E Lab into a rapidly growing company that trains organizations from the NHS to Amazon on optimizing what he calls the D.O.S.E chemicals.
The dopamine is responsible for your motivation. Oxytocin is responsible for your connection with humans. Serotonin, your energy levels and your mood. And then endorphins have this capacity to de-stress our brain.
Do you think entrepreneurs are more dopamine seeking than other people?
The quick dopamine addicts throughout your life probably are the people that are going to have the greatest chance of being good entrepreneurs. A lot of entrepreneurs probably have ADHD.
How do we get so from that?
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky.
What makes TJ's perspective fascinating isn't just his scientific expertise, but his personal experience.
I live each day with the sole focus of how do I rebalance my brain chemistry. And I effectively put myself on like a D.O.S.E rehab protocol.
Is there a point of no return? Like, is it possible to just run out of dopamine?
Yeah, that's a great question.
TJ, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So you've trained over 75,000 people in your lab and in your environments around the D.O.S.E effect.
I have.
Okay, and once upon a time, you were the, I suppose, perfect test subject. You were the problem.
I struggled a lot with addiction to like phones and alcohol. I was someone that had a ton of ambition, but just basically lacked the capacity to take action towards the things I was dreaming of, and effectively invented this whole D.O.S.E concept to try and sort my own brain out, discovered it was quite effective and began sharing it with others.
So set the scene. How old were you when you realized that you were maybe in quite a negative brain loop?
As young as I can kind of remember, like sort of 13, 14 years old, began to get very addicted to what we'd call quick dopamine, whether it was like the first time I tried a cigarette or a bottle of vodka with like friends at a party. Like I immediately found addiction very enticing, porn, these kind of things. And I maybe spent 10 years in that world up to about 22 years old, and eventually had one very specific evening where I had partied pretty hard. And I remember coming home very much feeling awful and really having to think in my head, like, is this lifestyle that I'm currently living going to lead to a life that I really love having? And at that point, I had quite a good conversation with myself that things were going to change. I didn't know how the hell I was going to try and change it because I was so lost in the dopamine land, but eventually managed to get onto a new path.
How much of what you just described do you think is kind of just going through the motions of being a normal teenager? I suppose I ask that because, there's a lot of this reflection. I can relate to everything you just said.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure most people can.
Yeah.
And part of that is just growing up and then at some point realizing that you have to become an adult. And, your brain is different when you're a teenager. Your brain is still growing so much and going through so many hormonal changes.
Yeah.
So how much of this do you think is, important to understand and avoid in our teenage years versus almost like go through the experience and realize, come out the other side like you did with an epiphany?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it is very normal. Like we're growing up in a world, all humans are growing up in a world that's just full of quick dopamine actions that we can engage with. So I don't think it was particularly unusual. I think out of my friendship group that I could observe, like I was particularly desiring getting drunk and partying really hard and being the one that wanted to stay up the latest. So I think I was leaning towards that end of like desire for dopamine, but I think everyone around me also wanted to have a lot of fun. And I don't necessarily think it was that bad. I just think eventually if you want a life where you're really thriving, you can build a really good relationship and build a business and be successful, I think you can't live in that addiction world the entire time and also achieve your goals.
Do you think that there is a correlation between the type of people that you and I have just self-described as, and successful, ambitious people? Because this is also it, right? Like maybe those kind of people that do have the addictive personalities, they are attracted to shiny new, they are attracted to the new thing, and it's all hypey and exciting. They often do go on to become the ambitious and powerful, successful, whatever outliers in society. Versus, I'm sure we've both got friends who were really sensible. And they got settled down early and they weren't interested in all of those things and they went to bed early and they avoided the raves and whatever else. But, now they're in their 30s and 40s. There's nothing wrong with their life, but it's not the one that we find inspiring personally or the one that we would want to adopt. So how do we square those two things?
Yeah, I think the quick dopamine addicts throughout your life probably are the people that are going to have the greatest chance of being good entrepreneurs. I definitely think that's the case. I think as an entrepreneur, you need a ton of ambition and you need to have this capacity to get so ridiculously absorbed in something, almost addicted to your work in order for your work to really thrive. And when you look at this dopamine chemical, humans are born with different baseline levels of this chemical. Some people have quite a naturally high level, some people have a low level. How they then go on to interact with the world will impact everything about how motivated they feel by things and how addicted they feel to things. And I think lots of entrepreneurs effectively have lower baseline dopamine, so they find everything very, very exciting.
Okay, so you went through the cycle, and then, as I understand it, you basically got yourself out of it in 60 days.
I basically took myself to my grandpa's house. He was someone that I loved, but I didn't spend that much time with. And I knew he lived out in nature. And I wasn't really someone that had spent much time in nature throughout my life. Maybe as like a really young kid, but not for maybe 10 to 15 years at this point. And
most people don't go to their grandpa's for a dopamine hit.
No, I basically went to dopamine fast, effectively, and get away from like all of the partying and everything. And
what was your insight? Sorry, what was your insight that said, I'm going to go visit grandpa and get myself out of this?
I think it was just like a desire to try and step out of my normal reality and be in somewhere where I was in complete control of the actions I was going to decide to do. Whereas because I love the excitement and fun, like if someone wanted to go for a beer or smoke a cigarette or anything, I couldn't say no. I really found it hard to say no to the fun. And even if I did, I'd sit there like really frustrated and uncomfortable with that. So I thought, my grandpa lived 90 minutes or so from London. I'm not going to be able to get into London as often. I'm going to be there. And I effectively put myself on like a D.O.S.E rehab protocol whereby I lived each day with the sole focus of how do I rebalance my brain chemistry. That was all I was thinking about. What I'm going to do today that's going to get my dopamine in balance, going to up my oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And I just couldn't believe how rapidly things changed.
And you'd already come up with a protocol for D.O.S.E or what?
I was inventing it at that point in time. I didn't yet notice the acronym that it spelt D.O.S E. I was thinking about them as like dopamine and endorphins and serotonin and oxytocin. During that period of time, I was one day on a walk and I had this realization that it spelt D.O.S E. Part of the whole protocol is you don't have phones with you when you're on walks. And I was like, oh my God, it spells D.O.S E. Like, that's huge. No one ever said that at university. How come that's the case? And then because I was away from technology, I couldn't Google it. And I was thinking in my head on the walk home, loads of people will have like thought of that D.O.S E concept. There'll be books and a research lab and a company. And I got home and Googled it and nothing existed called D.O.S E. I thought, what the hell? That's crazy. And then have spent about 7 days a week working every day for 5 years to get to here.
It is actually funny, isn't it? Because there are moments where things unfold like that. And I certainly can relate on the entrepreneurial instinct thing where you're like, God, give me a sign. Maybe I'm not religious, but there's got to be a sign from the universe that this is where my life's energy should go.
For sure.
And maybe Google will show me whether the spiritual moment is actually fulfilled. And if you can't find something like this, because I've been there myself with like, oh God, this idea is so exciting. Google, 100 other people had this idea. I guess it's going to be quite difficult. Maybe I'll just move on to the next one.
For sure.
Because in that moment, and this is again, it's a dose related comment. In that moment, your stimulation and your excitement and your focus and your passion and your energy suddenly elevates this one idea, this one epiphany you had above all others. And you can become so completely obsessed and certain that it's the right answer.
Yeah,
and then a few minutes later, have that whole world crumble beneath you when you realize that you're the zillionth person to have that insight. So it can't obviously be that unique.
Definitely. And that's a big dopamine rise and then fall, which actually creates like almost like a depression type feeling in the brain where you feel so disappointed. So yeah, that definitely, fortunately, got to continue to rise.
Right. And so I can so see how you have that insight and find that actually, yes, it's totally unique to you. And then that might well be your calling.
For sure. And I think this is interesting with entrepreneurship as well, because at that point, my brain would have experienced a huge amount of excitement and therefore a big elevation of dopamine. But then you can live in dreamland where you just think, oh, I'm going to go and build that. That's something that really excites me. And you can just kind of set goals, tell people all about them, but not actually take action on them. And I think that's something entrepreneurs have to be really conscious of, is like telling everyone about this amazing idea they've got, but not actually just doing the day by day, boring, disciplined actions that make that dream a reality. And then I sat down every single day was about like, how do I turn D.O.S E into something and use myself as a test subject to do so.
So what was, until this moment, what was your previous experience, right? Because neuroscientist, but neuroscientist is such a broad statement.
Yeah, for sure.
So what is it about your experience as a neuroscientist that enabled you to have, I suppose, the habits and behaviors that can turn it into execution?
I think it all came down to massively changing my relationship with my phone. I really believe the phone is the single thing holding humans back the most, especially in the world of entrepreneurship. I think things like alcohol and cigarettes and sugar, they've been here a very long time, and people still continue to be able to thrive with them. Never before have we been able to access dopamine so instantaneously and so frequently throughout the day. Like, you didn't wake up and just drink alcohol all day. You definitely wouldn't thrive if that was the case. I mean, I had little periods of my life where I kind of did do that, but I think the alteration with the relationship with the phone was ultimately what got my dopamine back into balance and got me very motivated and focused. I grew up as a kid that was super ADHD. I had no attention span, couldn't do school at all. Like, I just crumbled the whole of school until I found psychology. And I think the phone itself, as someone that, like, I got an iPhone when I was like 11 years old, my life's just kind of been absorbed inside there. Altering the relationship with it was the game changer.
I saw a really funny meme the other day that said, ugh, can't sleep again. I wonder if shining this bright light in my face with all the world's information quickly will solve that problem for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality we're in right now.
Just a quick scroll. You're like, yep, that's a good point. That does sound like the stupidest thing you could do.
There's this thing now called revenge bedtime procrastination. I put it on my Instagram the other day and I could not believe the response it had. Revenge bedtime procrastination is basically where you've had a busy day full of, like, caring for your family and working and so on, and you really believe by the time you get in bed that you deserve some time for yourself, which is fair to have that belief. But then in that moment, the time for ourselves is now scrolling social media, because that's what we perceive is the most, like, lovely experience of our time. And you reach a point where you're in bed and you know you should be going to sleep, and your whole brain and body is saying, please let me go to sleep, please let me go to sleep. But you force yourself through like an hour and a half of scrolling just because you feel as though you deserve it. And that's like a massive thing that's impacting these brain chemicals and affecting you the next day.
So one of my very strongly held beliefs is that the best entrepreneurs I know, and absolutely the way that I think about running my companies and my life, is optimizing, maintaining energy.
Okay.
And I think it's just so important, not necessarily focused on enough. There's so many other things, but I'm convinced that the entrepreneurs that win are the ones who fundamentally are able to stay at a good, consistent level of energy. You know, they wake up, they've got energy in their day, the energy with their family, they've got boundless energy.
Yeah.
That is something I think that you can master and practice in your daily habits, behaviors, nutrition, all the things, you know, we both talk about off camera, but, you know, this stuff's important. What's your insight around managing energy? Like, how have you put that into action in your own life? What's your advice for us?
I think one of the most interesting components of this is your serotonin system is responsible for your energy levels and your mood. And then you have this dopamine system responsible for your motivation and your capacity to focus on things. These two systems actually operate on an accelerator brake mechanism, meaning that when you're doing lots of dopamine type stuff, so that could be work related things where you're having to focus and build ideas and things like that, or it could be all the quick dopamine type stuff, which is your social media and porn and sugar and alcohol and so on. Whenever you're pressing the accelerator on dopamine, a brake is being put on your serotonin, meaning that the serotonin completely pauses in function. The big challenge is right now in the modern world is we're living in dopamine land, where we basically never take our foot off the accelerator of dopamine. We're either working on our goals or we're pleasuring our brain. That's basically our sole focus as a species now. And the serotonin is all of the things like meditation and being in natural environments and eating meals completely tech-free, nutrient-dense meals, napping, sleeping, the kind of stuff that really like gets your body to be a very happy species. If you press the serotonin accelerator, dopamine gets its moment to pause and regenerate itself. And it's really important, like how I approach it is thinking about what I call serotonin Saturdays and serotonin Sundays, whereby I try and spend the weekend pressing that accelerator like crazy on serotonin to let my dopamine break so that in the week I can work hard and I can restore my energy on the weekends.
What's something like this conversation?
This is oxytocin. So we're experiencing oxytocin by connecting with one another, eye contact, asking questions. We're also both experiencing a dopamine release because our brain is focusing on one thing. You can experience this almost like flow state type experience for you and I when we're in these conversations, because it's like a comfortable experience for us. Being deeply focused on something is dopamine.
Security compliance is one of those things that can silently derail your business. Not because it's impossible, but because most of us put it off until it becomes urgent. And by then, it's often too late. I want to tell you about Vanta because it fundamentally changed how our company handles compliance. They've built a system that automates preparing for SOC 2 and ISO 27001 certification, turning what used to be months of tedious work into a straightforward process. What makes Vanta different is that they understand this isn't just about checking boxes. It's about building trust with your customers while protecting your business. That's why over 8,000 companies, from two-person startups to major enterprises, rely on their platform. If you're growing your business and you know security compliance is something you need to address, visit vanta.com/secret leaders. They're offering $1,000 off your first year, and honestly, it's worth every penny just for the peace of mind. It's the solution you wish you'd found years ago. Use Vanta so you don't get slowed down by security paperwork and focus on what matters, growing your business. Visit vanta.com/secret leaders now and get $1,000 off your first year.
And obviously, depending on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert as well, or an ambivert, this is either a pleasant experience or not, right? So this is someone's idea of hell as well.
Oh, for sure. Some people.
In which case, it's not oxytocin. In that case, is that right?
Yeah. If you don't feel a sense of connection, there's no oxytocin. And similarly, you and I may be able to concentrate on this because this is something that we're naturally oriented towards doing, but someone else and practiced. Whereas someone else might think, oh my God, that looks like hell trying to focus with cameras and so on. So
I think that's it, right? Because for some people, this is the definition of stress.
For sure. And I think each of us finding that unique flow state, it doesn't have to be this, it can be whatever it is in your life that could serve your career and your journey. But finding that flow state where your brain deeply focuses on something for a prolonged period of time is very, very key.
Okay. Because obviously my work at Heights, I understand what these broad things are because I've been studying the brain just like you, not a neuroscientist, but I have written 400 now newsletters on the brain.
Let's go.
So I'm decent. I'm decent. I'm learned. I'm self-taught on Dr. Google and PubMed.
Nice.
But for those that don't, explain what the D.O.S.E acronym means and what each of those chemicals does and how they work and why people should care.
Definitely. So D.O.S.E is an acronym for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. The dopamine is responsible for your motivation. Oxytocin is responsible for your connection with humans. Serotonin, your energy levels and your mood. They're basically two interconnected experiences. And then endorphins have this capacity to de-stress our brain. The reason we need to care so much about this is there's this big concept in psychology called evolutionary mismatch. And this is the basic idea that our brain spent 300,000 years evolving out in nature as hunter-gatherers, developing these four chemicals for that experience of life. Like these brain chemicals didn't just show up 50 years ago when we found them. They've been sitting in there the whole time. We've just discovered what they are. About 30 years ago, we started radically changing the human experience to a much more sedentary digital lifestyle that's spent inside and with a very, very different food system. And when you look at these brain chemicals for our ancestors, when they were hunting all day for their dopamine, connecting in little groups for their oxytocin, eating natural foods outdoors for serotonin, and literally physically having to build their homes for their endorphins, each of these brain chemicals would be thriving. And when people go and visit hunter-gatherer tribes that are still operating today, like the Hadza in Central Africa, and attempt to describe the mental challenges that we're facing of depression and anxiety and burnout and stress, they can't even comprehend what we're experiencing because their brain chemistry is still living in balance because they're living how we're designed. If you transported those ancestors to our world, just move them here, and you gave them sugar and phones and sat them inside all day and sat them down at a desk all day, very quickly these brain chemicals would drop. And our whole goal at D.O.S.E Lab is to help people understand that a huge amount of the mental challenges that we're facing in the modern world are a result of chemical imbalances occurring in our brain because of our new lifestyles. And the great news is there's very simple things we can do to rebalance the chemicals, get things back into order.
Okay. And obviously people, will be so inspired to hear not just they relate to the problem, but that there are some solutions.
For sure.
So I guess breaking them down one by one, what are some practical tips then on how we can rebalance some of these? Let's start with D.
Yeah, so starting with dopamine. The most important thing to understand about dopamine is it basically was designed to create the experience of doing hard things and make us do hard things and make that experience feel good. So when we were out hunting or building shelter or rubbing rocks together for hours to start a fire, dopamine created this rewarding experience of effort so that we kept doing these things so that we survived. The most important principle in your head is understanding that you need to earn dopamine in order to feel truly motivated and focused. You can't just live a life whereby you're quickly, easily accessing it. To put some context into that, if I went to visit one of these tribes, and I went to watch the Hadza, for example, for a week, and I watched all their morning routines, and they were waking up, and some of them were doing the fires, and some of them the shelter, and some of them hunting and foraging and building tools and whatever it may be. That's likely what they would do as soon as they wake up. They wouldn't just like lounge around doing nothing. If I then went to all of those hunter-gatherers, and every morning when they woke up, I handed each of them a donut. So they woke up, eyes open, boom, here's a donut, and they ate that donut. Very quickly, over a week of observing their behavior, you would see that they had become very, very demotivated as a group, because they would have already got a reward as soon as they had woken up, and they would have therefore no drive to go and do something hard to get a reward. When we wake up in the morning and we go on our phone, we're effectively eating a metaphorical donut in our brain. Like our brain is waking up thinking, okay, I need to go and earn my dopamine like it did for 300,000 years, but I'm just going straight into the phone, loads of reward, and then it's depleting this molecule instead of slowly building it, and therefore causing this experience of a lack of ability to take action to these goals and focus on our goals. So step one is all about earning your dopamine in the morning when you wake up instead of being given it for free.
What's a good example of earning your dopamine?
Anything that's effortless. If you woke up and you went and brushed your teeth and had a shower, made your bed, stepped outside for a few minutes for a walk, all of those are effortful actions that would cause your dopamine to slowly increase in your brain. When you go straight into the phone, because there's a limited amount of dopamine that we have access to, you're just going to use all of it up, put the phone down, and then feel like this like depleted experience. And many of us are just used to that feeling now. We think that's just how we feel. But when you start waking up and taking action as soon as you wake, which is our underlying law of dopamine, we have these 4 laws, take action when you wake, then you start to build it slowly through effort.
So in that example, when would be a reasonable time to pick up my phone and start scrolling? Because, we've got to talk practically. Mm-hmm. Thinking about an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Sure, I've got my bad Twitter habits, but, the email and Slack habits are just as bad.
Yeah.
So I'm going to want to know what's going on in my businesses. I'm going to want to know how important I am and what problems I can't solve and all of the things.
Yeah.
When is a reasonable time to be doing that in this build-up?
The optimal solution is that the phone isn't even the first piece of technology you see. Your laptop is going to be the first piece of technology. So in a world where you say you have a work from home day, you wake up, you do all you can to resist that phone. I really recommend using things like iPads as your alarm, because you're less likely to scroll it when you wake up, or purchasing an alarm. But having your phone on your bedside table is going to be very hard to resist. You wake up and you try and just do a little bit of the getting ready. So you just like have your shower, you brush your teeth, you get your clothes on. Once you think, okay, I really want to work now, and maybe you're like super hooked on your work and you need to get to your work quickly, then you go to your desk, you open your laptop, and from your laptop you open WhatsApp and email and Slack and LinkedIn, whatever it is that you perceive as like effortful work, but you open it from there. The problem is with the phone is you open the phone and then you go on it and then you're like, okay, I'm doing something important here. I'm on my email and Slack. But then it's like, oh, I'm off there and there's the Instagram icon. So I'm just going to check Instagram. Then I'm going to check Twitter. Then you end up in depleting dopamine land. So it's really important that, for example, that's the protocol I follow, is the first experience technology every day is my laptop. And all of those feelings of checking how important I am or doing my work or whatever it might be that you desire, all of it can be done in there. You could then nail out like 30 minutes of work, get everything, like, how there's so many notifications now to go through every time we wake up. Smash it all out on the computer, make yourself feel like you've done something effortful. Then if you need to like have your coffee and like scroll your phone to like satisfy the addiction, you could do that, but you definitely want to do the computer first.
Got it. So what I'm understanding is stick your laptop next to your bed. Scroll that at night. Okay.
I actually would say having your laptop on your bed listening to a podcast at night would be better than scrolling in bed.
Yeah, it's fair. Okay. One of the things that I'm struggling to understand with what you're saying.
Yeah.
It sounds like, and I'm absolutely, archetypal person you're talking about.
Yeah.
My phone's by my bed.
Yeah.
I think I'm important. I'm completely concerned that I seem to have been... I've now got myself into a situation where I could scroll Twitter right before bed and go to sleep.
For sure.
That's terrifying. I shouldn't be able to consume that much information about how the world's going to shit and then just have a lovely night's sleep. But here we are. So something's gone on where I've basically just conditioned myself that, it's almost so blasé. That leads me to the question of just wondering, like, am I completely dopamine deficient at this point? Like, is there a limited amount of dopamine?
If I was to ask you these two questions, we could get a base idea of where your dopamine level is at. It would be great to scan your brain, but this would give us an indication. If I was to get you to rate your daily motivation level on average from 1 to 10, 10 being you literally feel unbelievably motivated all the time, you never don't, and 1, you can't do anything at all, what score would you give yourself on average from 1 to 10?
I feel like an 8 or so. I'm
Okay.
pretty good self-motivator, and I reckon entrepreneurs would score quite high on that anyway.
Yeah. And so when you're faced with doing something difficult that you don't want to do, like one of the annoying tasks in your working life, how likely are you to do it? Like, do you find it annoying and really hard to get yourself to do it and procrastinate it and do something else?
Oh, yeah.
And what kind of score would you give yourself from 1 to 10 on your ability to do something you don't want to do?
So low.
So low.
Like
okay.
2.
Okay, and that's a really good indicator of how much dopamine is sitting in your brain. When you've got a really healthy level of dopamine, your ability to do something annoying is much better. If you were to rate your attention span from 1 to 10, 10 you're a monk and 1
0.
0. Okay. So that would indicate that like maybe your dopamine level is a little bit lower, because those two questions, if they were very high, would indicate, okay, dopamine is absolutely thriving in the brain. So the Twitter at night, for example, will be depleting some of that molecule. And I think the most important thing is not to have it in the morning. If it was one or the other, if content's going to get consumed, I would still consume it at night and not in the morning. But I think it's important to understand this idea. Like you said, that the best entrepreneurs are great at managing their energy and just always being there, ready to go. We've kind of been led to believe in the modern world that motivation is something that's really fleeting, and sometimes you got it, sometimes you don't, and that's just like not up to us. That's really not the case when you look into the modern neuroscience research. Like, we are very in control of how motivated we are, and it's all dependent on how much are we consuming quick dopamine. And if we overconsume it, we use up all the dopamine molecules in our brain, suddenly we don't have much, and then our motivation is low. Then we do something effortful, like go for a walk or something with our kids, or cook a meal, or do a workout, do a focused work session. It rebuilds, and then our motivation is up again. But it's not just randomly fluctuating, it's fluctuating dependent on our actions.
Got it. So what are some of the negative traits you see about people managing their energy, especially entrepreneurs? What are my toxic traits to watch out for?
The late night thing is pretty big. Like the sleep, of all 20 actions within D.O.S.E, we have these 20 core behaviors, 5 in each chemical. I actually believe sleep is the most important action of the entire protocol.
And is that just because, you know, you're switched off, so therefore you're just guaranteed default, not distracted, not doing X, Y, and Z, and therefore you're recharging?
You're recharging, and we need a ton of energy to manage the level of stimulation we're now experiencing in the world. And the part of the reason sleep is so important is not just that it's so regenerative for our brain chemistry, but also because when sleep gets bad, a domino falls that then affects all other decision making. Like, a bad night's sleep will lead to scrolling when you wake, a more sugary breakfast, less likely to go for a walk in the morning and get sunlight, less likely to do the hard task first when you get to your computer. So it's like everything is downstream of a good night's sleep, and the opposite dominoes fall. When you have an amazing sleep, you wake up and you're like, fuck yeah, like I'm ready to take on the world. So I would say the sleep thing is big. I totally understand the desire to consume content though. Like, I love reading Twitter. Like, for me, one of my most joyous moments of my whole day is like after dinner, I'll sit down on the sofa with my iPad, which, to be honest, was basically just spending like $1,000 on a Twitter scrolling device. Like, I don't really use this iPad for anything. And I just sit there on my laptop, on the iPad, and I just like scroll Twitter. So I love content. I love going on YouTube. I love watching podcasts. I love all the content, but it's more just trying to be strategic on what content am I consuming when. Like, burning Twitter just before sleep is going to really deplete the dopamine just before you go to sleep. So you might wake up with low dopamine. If you were to burn yourself on Twitter at like 7, 8 p.m., that sort of time, and then move towards like longer form content like movies and Netflix and YouTube and longer form videos, and have that slowly wind you down, that would be like a more optimal way to interact with it.
Got it. Okay. So we talked earlier about, you know, you're a neuroscientist. You went from saying you were quite poor academically to writing a book in 4 months.
Yeah.
If I want to master that kind of energy, how do I do it?
Yeah, I was really not thriving at school. I found psychology when I was like 16 at A-levels, and I literally just picked it on the list because it was the only thing school hadn't told me about. And I was like, oh, I'll just do that at college because at least it's something I might like, because I hate everything else. And then began that, discovered like finally I was interested in something. And typically with an entrepreneurial ADHD dopamine addict type brain, unless you're very interested in it, you're going to be crap at it. But if you're interested in it, you can really get good at it. In terms of then going to university and then getting better and better and learning to study, ultimately to writing that book. When I began writing that book, I really just put serious systems in place to be able to access flow state, because when I was like posed the idea of writing this book, when like publishers came to me, I thought, me writing a book, like my whole life, the like story of who I am as a human would never be someone that was going to write a book. And I remember working with my team, like how are we going to put me in a position where I can smash this out? Because I wanted to write an amazing book, but I also had a research lab to run and a business to run. So it was like, how am I going to manage all of that time? And the whole goal was around nighttime routine, into my morning routine, into waking up and accessing the deepest flow state possible to get as much done early in the day as I could so that I could move on to running everything else.
Okay. Take us through that kind of day then.
So I moved the bedtime to super early. Like it was extreme. I moved my bedtime to like going to bed like 8:30 at night, which I understand isn't a realistic thing to do. But if there was a period where you thought,
why do you say that's not realistic?
Because we're addicts, or you've got families, like one or the other. Like I think I didn't yet have a family. I imagine like if I had a family and I was putting them to bed at like 8:30 at night, if I had young kids, and then I wanted some time with my partner and stuff to hang out, like I can appreciate you might desire that time. Currently, I get some chill time from like 6 till 8, so I can kind of have the bedtime early. But for me, I knew that if I slept ridiculously well, and like early for some people might be if you went to bed at 10, that would be a massive win. But I knew if I slept really well, I could wake early at like 6, but feel good at 6. Then I would go out for a walk. I would wake up. I wouldn't enter the phone at all. I'd just leave for the walk as soon as I woke up in the morning. And I found in the quietness, all of the inspiration and creativity to solve the problems for my day were like found out there. And I was someone that hated the quiet as well. Like I, at first was like, oh my God, like all these scary voices in my mind. Then I found like a lot of creativity came. And then I would come back and I would literally open the laptop and just hammer straight into it. I would just open Google Docs and just start writing as quickly as I could to try and force flow state to occur. It takes about 15 minutes of our brain solely focusing on one task to begin to enter this deep state of focus called flow state. And typically prior to writing this book, how I would always work is I would do a task for a little bit and then it would get a bit annoying or boring or difficult, and then I would just change task. And that was kind of happening every 5 to 10 minutes. I was never staying on something. After 15 minutes, you begin to operate at a much more efficient level. You start to write faster, think faster, create faster. So I was just kind of orienting towards that. And whilst I appreciate operating companies, you can always work like that. If you had a period where you think, I've got to solve this problem in my business, or I've got to invent this idea, or I've got to get this thing to the next stage, going through even just 1 week where you're like, I'm going to fucking dial in and I'm going to live my morning routine like that, I think it's worthwhile.
Managing international money used to drive me crazy until I found Wise Business, the account for doing business in other currencies. I can hold money in different currencies and only convert when the rates are good. No more rushing to exchange at bad rates or losing money on outrageous fees. And my team handles all the payments themselves. I don't have to micromanage anything. They have their own logins, set their own limits, and I just keep an eye on things from my phone. One simple account lets you pay and get paid in over 40 currencies. There's no hidden fees, no marked up exchange rates, and it connects right to your accounting software. Whether you're paying vendors or suppliers in Europe or you're getting paid from Australia, it's all just easy. And that's what I love about Wise. It just takes this complicated thing and it makes it really simple. Your money's always secure with 24/7 protection, and you can see exactly where everything is in real time. To learn more about how you can use Wise Business to save time, money, and stress, visit wise.com/business. Yeah, it's interesting because you're basically describing what everyone would love to try and do. I actually practiced morning pages last year. Have you done that?
I haven't done it, but I have heard of it.
It's a sort of similar concept, isn't it? Which is basically that whatever comes out of your brain when you start is junk.
Yeah.
So you can guarantee that the first thoughts, the first words, the first effort in the day is crap.
Yeah.
So the concept of morning pages is quite simple. It's like turn on a tap, get the shit out.
Okay.
And after,
that's true.
After 3 pages of that shit, you'll start to actually find some clarity. Mm-hmm. And from that moment, those are some clean thoughts. So start getting that into action. I think what you just described is a similar kind of process.
Definitely.
Just get it down on a page.
Just get started. And like when I first was writing, I was being I am like a really strong perfectionist. I had OCD since I was like 5 years old. So I've been like very over analytical with things, and I was trying to write the book with perfection, and that was just not a good plan. Like such a slow way to try and do it. So I did move towards just write everything and then refining later, and that was a better way to operate.
And when you had these ideas, because this would be my fear.
Yes.
You have these ideas. Am I going to remember this idea by the time I come back from the walk? Yeah.
I had that because I was someone that like every time I had an idea, it would be straight to Apple Notes and like write the idea down. But the challenge with that is if you're walking and you have a really good idea, but it's 40 minutes till you get to your house and you think, I really think this is a great idea, the only way you're going to remember it is by continuing to think about it. So then when I had a really good idea, I'd be thinking, shit, I don't want to forget this, but I'm not going to be home for like 40 minutes. So then I would be like, okay, let's try and keep it in my brain. So then I'd have to think about it more and more and more. And I ended up going much, much deeper on the ideas I was having. And a lot of the time previously, I'd have these notes in my phone full of like lots of different ideas. Whereas in this lens, I'd come home and I'd have one idea, but it'd be very, very deeply thought through. And I felt like over time that was actually formulating much better ideas.
Okay. And I presume, the quality of the ideas that you can have really stem, sure, there's a side of creativity, but they stem from how much knowledge and expertise you have on a subject.
Yeah, for sure.
So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm thinking, all right, this sounds really helpful and stuff, you still probably have to do a decent amount of sector specific reading and collecting other ideas and stuff to be able to formulate your own point of view in this specific area, right?
For sure.
It's not like some divine intervention spiritual concept that just lands on you as you're on these walks that you never held in your head in the first place.
For sure. And you got to consume content. Consuming content's magic. Like, I think it's amazing we've got these phones and YouTube and everything to just like learn and en masse. I think podcasts, especially in the scientific community, but in all communities, that's just the one I consume a lot of. But in all worlds of learning about business and technology and AI, there's so much to learn. So I think consuming is amazing. And long form is so much better for our brain than short form. So if you're going to sit on the sofa and scroll all evening, it'd be so good if you just cast it to the TV and just sat and watched it, for example. The other time in which I would always really consume content is breaking up with scrolling my phone whilst having a shit in the morning was extremely difficult to do. That was, for me, was like wake up, go to the bathroom and just sit there like that. And that was a hard thing to break. The only way I could break that was by putting a book in the bathroom and every morning I just sit there and I just read. And that's basically the only time I read. But day by day, you do like 5 or 10 pages every morning. You're slowly building dopamine through reading, which is great. And then you just like gradually churn through books. So I think reading first thing in the morning is awesome for the brain. And then I think consuming longer form content is great. But you're definitely going to have to learn things in order to then create good ideas.
Okay. Last clarification on dopamine from a selfish point of view.
Yeah.
Is there a point of no return? Like, is it possible to just run out of dopamine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's an area of our brain called the ventral tegmental area. And you can think of this as basically your dopamine factory. In your ventral tegmental area, it's a little ball like in the center of my brain if I went through here. In there, you can build what's called dopamine vesicles, like little dopamine bubbles. And you can literally imagine that when you're doing something that's effortful, say something as simple as like cleaning your house, not like a fun task, but it's very effortful. As you're cleaning your house, your brain is literally stitching together little dopamine vesicles. You then have something called your nucleus accumbens, which is your reward center. And during that time in which I'm cleaning the house, what my brain is doing is it's stitching together the bubbles and then it's gradually shipping some of those bubbles to the reward center. And it's giving me this feeling of like, oh, this is actually kind of good. Like sometimes like even, for example, you clean your kitchen, all the dishes and the hob and everything. And it's like an annoying task, but gradually as you get through it, you're like, oh, it's actually kind of nice that I'm like cleaning all this stuff. I know Bill Gates was like a big guy about how good it is to like slowly clean your kitchen every day for motivation. And from a dopamine lens, that's exactly why. In a situation like that, building loads of bubbles, slowly shipping them, that's great. You're replenishing the system and you're feeling satisfied. In a situation where we're on the social media, specifically if we're scrolling short videos, what basically happens is your brain goes, oh my God, this is so pleasurable. And it starts mass shipping the bubbles from the factory to the reward center. And gradually, like during that, it's like, wow, this feels amazing. This feels amazing. You're scrolling and you're scrolling and scrolling. But during that time, you're not putting in any effort at all. So there's no people in there stitching together new bubbles and replenishing the factory. So eventually, after enough scrolling or enough drinking alcohol or enough sugar, the factory is going to get so ridiculously low on this molecule. And the experience of like real depression, where you can't do anything at all. Like I navigated like 2 years of depression. The experience of depression, even going and having a shower or making some food is like, oh my God, I can't do it. And you're so low in that molecule. Lighter than depression, like if you're really just low in motivation and focus and so on. Again, that's just like a slightly more molecules, but still very little. So in answer to it, yes, you can reach a point where you basically have none of this, but there's never a point of no return, because as soon as you start doing effortful actions again, even if it was just today I made my bed, you've still at least built a few more and you can gradually replenish the factory.
And this is the brake and accelerator system you're talking about. So by doing some activities on serotonin, you're putting the brake on dopamine, which enables it to create more bubbles, so to speak.
Yeah, so then you bring in the serotonin situation, and this whole center of building the factory, building the molecules and shipping them to a raw center, all of that would just get a chance to just pause for a bit whilst you're doing serotonin. If you were out on a walk in nature with your family, talking about like what you're happy about that happened that week, that's just like a beautiful serotonin, oxytocin land that's letting this dopamine system go, oh, finally I can have a break. And originally for our ancestors, they were operating with like an equal amount of each of these. Like they did hunting all day, but then they'd also come back and sit around fires and they made like music and they did all kinds of stuff. They were balancing them. Whereas now it's just dopamine. And the system is like, please give me a break. So we need to do so.
Do you think entrepreneurs are more dopamine seeking than other people?
100 million percent. A lot of entrepreneurs probably have ADHD. And it could be that you have quite light level ADHD. It could be you were born with ADHD. And ADHD.
So many I know have it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
myself included.
For sure. Yeah. Me too. And I think it's really interesting when you look at this evolutionarily, because when you have ADHD, you have lower dopamine production. So your factory makes a few less bubbles, it ships a few less bubbles. But in a situation like that, when you then experience something that's dopaminergic, like porn or sugar or alcohol, because you were coming from a baseline here and then suddenly you experience massive stimulation, the climb is much greater than someone that had like a neurotypical level of dopamine in their brain. So it feels really, really, really good. And the same can occur when you do something effortful. Say, for example, you get really into a work task, you also get this bigger climb. So that can feel really, really good. So you can get really good at those things. So you're prone to each one. If you took a hunter-gatherer that had low baseline dopamine, like they were born with genetic ADHD, that hunter-gatherer would get to like 7, 8 years old. Whenever they were required to do something for the tribe, you got to make the fire, you got to build the shelter, you got to go hunting with us. In that moment, they would go out and do it and experience a greater level of dopamine increase than the rest of the tribe, and likely would then enjoy it the most, and then over time would actually become the best at it. And I actually reckon our world was built off of the ADHD brain. I think the ADHD brain would have been so magical for building an effortful part of the community that really drove progress. And there's this interesting theory whereby about 12,000 years ago, we invented farming, and that radically changed the human experience, because prior to farming, everyone's sole goal was go and get food, bring it back to the tribe and eat the food. As soon as farming was invented, it really changed things and it slowed the pace of humanity, because suddenly a few people took care of food and everyone else could like sit around and think and do different activities. There's this theoretical model that some people have a farmer type brain where they're happy with a slower pace of life, and some people still have the hunter brain that's obsessed with more. And I think a lot of the ADHD people in our world have that hunter brain that's just like, I need more. And that's not a bad thing. It's great to have those people in society.
Okay, so as someone who's had burnout, I'm assuming that dopamine spikes and dopamine drops are very responsible for things like burnout, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So how do you square, or what is almost your perspective on the types of entrepreneurs that are building tools and building products that really feed this problem?
That's very true. And burnout is something that's super common. Like if you've got a dopamine level addiction to like good work stuff or quick pleasure stuff, burnout is going to occur. And you're meaning that the people that are literally building the softwares that we're interacting with.
I mean, even worse, right? Even being even more cynical.
Yeah, go cynical, because then I can imagine it.
You know what? I won't even slag someone else off. Yeah. Once upon a time, I had a company called Grabble.
Okay.
And Grabble's entire job, it was a mobile app, and the job is to get people to purchase shopping online.
It's dopamine.
Right? So yeah, our job at Grabble was literally to get people addicted to our app.
Okay.
And if we don't survive.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of entrepreneurs. I'm not a bad person, but that's the game I had to play to win. And I know, whilst I'm building this kind of company, that that's the job. And every single person, I promise you this, every single person who's an entrepreneur, and let's just keep it focused, that builds an app within the mobile app ecosystem, knows that that is 100% the job. Even one of my best friends, Michael from Calm.
Yeah.
So even,
I know that.
Even the guys at Calm, they only survive if they can work that out. That is so deeply cynical, but so deeply true. How do we get so unfucked from that?
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky. I think the scenario of Calm, like at least the time spent in there is slower dopamine, which is good, like listening and meditating and so on, and sleeping. I come back to this point of view that we really have to have a better capacity to have physical separation from the phone. Because if you're anywhere near the technology, they're in control of your brain and you're not going to win the fight. And this is why, for example, I even gave that scenario where have the iPad as your alarm instead of the phone, because the iPad is not as carefully constructed to get you addicted to it. That's why Instagram don't have an iPad app, for example. They've just got a blown up version of Instagram. They know that if everyone could use it on the iPad, it'd be less addictive. So it's like keep everyone dialed in on the mobile version of it. And I think for many of us, we've gone over the last 10 years as phones have got much more advanced and social media has got much more easy to interact with and better to interact with. I think we've lulled ourselves into thinking that we need to always have this device near us. And in our research at D.O.S.E Lab, we can literally cut people's screen time in half. And all we're teaching them to do is learn to not have the phone on them as often. So when they're sitting at a desk, it's just in another room. When they're watching TV on the sofa, it's in another room. The bedroom, kitchens, when they go for walks, they just develop this capacity to physically separate from it more. And I think if the phone's always on you, they're going to win that battle. And when you're looking at burnout, if you just eliminate technology, like you mentioned, you like doing those retreats where you come off tech for 3 days. I'm sure those feel magical for your level of burnout, because on those retreats you're entering serotonin land where it's just slow and present, you feel quite content, and you're just nature walking and cooking food and reading and so on. And I think so much of the burnout is just driven by the fact we think we need to be on tech all the time. And it's really important to just consider, I'm burning out because I'm literally burning myself out with technology, and learning to find much more space from it and quote unquote phone fast is the best thing you can do.
So I think you're spot on, by the way. And I know many entrepreneurs, sadly, like myself, quite often, I'm as bad as anyone else, can pride myself on hustle culture. And the hustle culture is quite passe. But fundamentally, the winners in society on an entrepreneurial level tend to be those who are just obsessed with their work. And they just have that much more to give, that much more energy, that much more passion. It's one of the reasons why I'm so obsessed with energy. It's because I need it to contain my obsession and energy for the things that I put myself forward for.
And that's cool.
And someone else is going to win if I don't. And whether or not those are insecure, anxious thoughts inside my head or practical realities that will hopefully see me through to some kind of imaginary finish line, who knows?
Yeah.
But it's probably toxic. So what are the sort of neurochemical things going on inside my head, and how do I stop them from happening and still win?
I mean, the neurochemical things taking place is you're living on this perpetual hunt for dopamine, and dopamine never satisfies us. It's literally evolutionarily programmed to never satisfy us, so that even when we found loads of food out there, we wanted to keep going out and finding more so that we always had a good supply. So it's designed to perpetually make you just, I need more. And we're living on that conveyor belt as a species, whereby you right now have a ridiculously thriving company, but I'm sure you feel just as ambitious as you did 5 years ago prior to the company being that successful. It's more.
Terribly.
So you just
annoyingly more.
You just want more. And an element of this is understanding that separating from dopamine, so consuming a little bit less social media, for example, at nighttime on Twitter, or not consuming content in the morning, that's only going to serve your capacity to actually achieve more, because you're going to have more healthy dopamine enabling you to take action on the goals, focus on the goals, do those hard, annoying things that you don't want to do that enable the business to make progress. So there's an element of helping your brain understand that by coming away from this device, which I perceive as the answer to me being successful, by coming away from it for windows of time is only going to lead to a much more motivated brain. In the same way that an Olympic athlete, the way to win the 100 meters isn't to spend all day, every day running the 100 meters. The 100 meter sprinters are the best at the rest, effectively. They're so good at recharging and ensuring their body is optimized. The same occurs with technologies that are addicted to making products on their phones and laptops, that you have to come away from it in order to build the best thing. The other side of this then brings in the oxytocin conversation, which comes into the how much gratitude and how much love do you feel for what you've already built. And bear in mind, I'm on the exact same journey here. I'm completely obsessed with D.O.S E. All I want is for D.O.S E to be in every school in the world one day, and all kids across the world are learning D.O.S E, and adults can all have access to D.O.S E. And I kind of have this naive potentially belief in my head that is going to be a reality. I believe that might be the case one day. And therefore I'm obsessed with making that happen. But then it's so important for me in order to live in a brain that feels calm and settled at times, so I'm not just yearning for more every single second of my life, which I have spent doing. is to come into this oxytocin pathway of like feeling deep love and gratitude for what is as well.
Got it. Is entrepreneurship just fundamentally unhealthy?
No, I don't think it's fundamentally unhealthy.
I don't know. You laughed in my face. I'm pretty sure there was some truth in it then.
I mean, I think it can drive a very unhealthy lifestyle. And I think you definitely got to be super careful with it being your sole goal in life. It's entrepreneurship. And I think for me, I'm constantly trying to think, how does my entrepreneurship serve these other chemicals? So like, for me, my biggest dream in life is eventually having like a beautiful home in a forest with my wife and kids. And that's what I'm aiming towards. And that's not a dopamine dream. That's like an oxytocin, serotonin type dream.
Sort of like the Unabomber, but with family.
Yeah, effectively. And I think you just got to make sure your entrepreneurial ambition is also serving connection and love and like an experience of life that's slow as well as an experience of building things.
Okay. So is there a problem almost with what you're saying, and for someone that like yearns to be in city life, like active, energetic city life? That it's fascinating because obviously a lot of people move from city to countryside for exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people also choose to stay in a city for other reasons, which include their kids, right? It includes access to culture, access to education, yada, yada, yada. You can cut probably down the middle both ways. The arguments are really sound and valid both ways.
Yeah.
I grew up in a city. I grew up in London. So is that bad for me, so to speak? Like, is it really bad to replenish dopamine? Is it, you know, we've talked about the granular level of dopamine, my phone habits, etc. at home, but is there a more macro environmental concept as well about where you exist as well?
Yeah, I think in a city, you are definitely going to be more tempted by dopamine. There's just more dopamine to be had in a city environment. There's more fast food, there's more pubs, there's more of that energy of like fast and hustle and stimulation. But it doesn't mean you couldn't thrive in a city. Like I was in New York last week. New York's obviously a pretty full-on experience, but I still managed to spend little windows of time in Central Park and nice time in like cool chilled out coffee shops where I could slow down a little bit. And I think it's just important to make sure as an entrepreneur, even if you're a city-based entrepreneur, that you do some things just to do that thing and not for it to be a productive experience. Like it's really great to go and sit in a coffee shop with your family on a Saturday morning and drink a coffee or a hot chocolate or a decaf coffee if you want to try and slow down on the weekend a little bit, and just to like be in the present experience, talking to your wife or really engaging with your kid and so on, and just having complete separation from Slack and email and checking the Stripe sales and all these kind of things. Like as long as there's windows of time where you're just present in the experience and it feels a little bit slower for your nervous system, you could definitely thrive in any environment. If you're thinking, I'm so screwed by this like dopamine addiction lifestyle and it's really holding me back and affecting my mental health, then I do think you could let your mind ponder living out in nature. Like maybe that would be a route whereby you actually were more successful when you felt more peaceful, but it doesn't have to be the case.
Where do you live now?
In nature.
In nature.
I live in a town called Farnham, which is about an hour south of London. And for me, like I could not resist like the Thursday night pints, for example. Like to me,
I think you sent me a photo of your house actually. I remember it is in nature.
Yeah, it's like I live in a town. I'm very close to like parks and stuff, and hopefully as D.O.S.E grows, like I'll be able to move out into deep nature. That's my goal, to basically be a hunter gatherer with a phone and a Starlink on my roof or whatever I need. And I think for me, I just couldn't manage the addiction to the dopamine. I don't think that's the same for everyone, but like when all my friends are saying like, let's go get smashed on a Thursday night, and like, no, let's just go for one pint, and then it's like impossible to have one pint for me anyway. So then it's like 6 pints, and then Friday's ruined, and then like Saturday it's like I feel so shit, so I'm gonna get really drunk again. For me, I couldn't manage that loop and be a successful entrepreneur. Some people like just can. They're just like so driven they can deal with it, but that's what I needed.
But okay, is it a problem if you can just deal with it? So here's, I guess, the other side of this question. I can just deal with being in London.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I can deal with a lot of this dopamine addiction stuff, it turns out. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking that sounds even more toxic and worse maybe than not being able to, because like maybe I'm just, you know, it's a bit like someone who doesn't feel pain, but they're still going to get the bleeds and burns and all the things. Yeah. So it's not good that you couldn't feel the pain. There's a reason it's there. Is that problematic if you feel like you can actually just push through that stuff and still be really productive and make stuff work?
it might not be problematic to your success if you're able to just be super successful but live in quick dopamine. It might just be problematic to how peaceful you feel. And it depends, like, is that a priority for you? Like, do you feel like it's important to you to feel peaceful in your brain? Like, is that something you desire?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think...
But I mean, that's because this is a good question, because I do work on that as well as part of my own process and system.
So you're not only living in dopamine land, you are doing...
I practice gratitude, and I'm quite deliberate with certain things, and I make sure, for example, I see my mum every week.
Cool.
And I do the things that I'm like, this is what a good, healthy human male would do at this age, etc., etc. Right? I have a daughter.
Cool.
We play Doll's House.
Let's go.
Not a lot of dopamine going on in Doll's House. To tell you that
dopamine.
much. Just pure fascination. Oxytocin, I guess.
Yeah, oxytocin for sure.
So I suppose there's that side of, when you have a family as well, you're sort of brought out of your reality.
Yep.
If you choose to be present with it, which I do.
Yeah, that's cool.
You are taken out of your reality, and I do bedtime, bath time every single day.
Let's go.
So that's like 6 to 8:30. I'm not on my phone that I'm publicly saying on a podcast. No, I probably am. I still do some flicking whilst I'm with her, but in my head I'm not. In my head I'm with her. Yeah. So there's definitely ways I could do it.
For her, do you think she's with? Does she perceive that you're there, or does she perceive you're on the phone?
No, I think mostly she perceives that I'm with her.
Unreal.
So reading stories and stuff. It's
cool.
Fun. Yeah. And she's now 3, so she calls me out if I'm on my phone.
Oh wow. Okay.
Daddy, put your phone away.
Yeah.
Which is
One
great.
day she'll be learning about D.O.S E and she'll be like, Dad, that's bad for your dopamine.
Yeah, 100%. We've got her currently learning about what's good and bad for her microbiome.
Oh, let's go.
It's
At
great.
3 years old. Can she understand a little bit of that?
Yeah, her happy forest and her sad forest.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Been teaching. I'm in gut health.
Yeah, let's
go.
Got
to do it.
Is she on subs?
Well, she's on like kids probiotics.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got to start to get the education and that stuff in early.
Yeah.
But it's a great party trick as well when you can get your friends come around. You're like, Margot, say that thing about your happy forest and bad forest. Oh yeah, this is good for my microbiome. They're
Let's
like,
go.
Oh, your child's a genius. You're like, no, we just taught her one sentence to say in front of people. Yeah, exactly.
I would say, like, with that scenario you're giving there, you're not just living in dopamine land.
No, sure.
Like, yeah, you are living in London. London's like a really cool place, and you can do London and also get the other chemicals. If you still are having beautiful, loving, slow moments with family, your mum, your daughter, your partner, that's amazing for your oxytocin. If ever you can do things like go to Richmond Park, like maybe she might like Richmond Park, seeing like the reindeer, not the reindeer, whatever they're called.
The deer, yeah.
They're pretty big, those deer. That's why I said
we go to Kew Gardens a lot, actually.
Kew Gardens, like as long as there's still a priority of the other chemicals. The endorphins chemical is all about like hard physical action through exercise, through sauna, even things like singing and dancing. Like
I think taking your 3-year-old to a sauna is probably a human rights abuse. But
don't take her into the sauna. But like, as long as there's like things in your lifestyle that are also enabling the other chemicals to rise, then you can live in dopamine land, aka London. But it's just important that you don't only live in dopamine land, which is just only work and alcohol and social media.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about some practical things you can do then. So you've talked about phone fasting.
Yeah.
All right. Teach me, indoctrinate me, give me a new addiction, but this one can be healthy.
Aside from phone fasting, a different...
No. Talk to me about phone fasting.
So the goal of phone fasting has a few components. It involves 30 minutes before you see the phone when you wake up in the morning. That being said, you could go into the laptop if you needed to check other things. So it's 30 minutes before a phone gets seen in the morning. It involves 60 minutes complete physical separation in the evening. So that means hanging out with your daughter, having dinner, watching movies, whatever it might be, but 60 minutes. And it involves 2 times on the weekend, a 2-hour break on a Saturday and a Sunday. That one is really hard, and like it's great to just like evolve into these things. You don't have to like do it first week, think, oh no, I've nailed it, I'm now phone fast pro. But the goal is 30 minutes morning, 60 minutes evening, 2-hour breaks on Saturday and Sunday, and then you're a professional phone faster.
2-hour consecutive, like 2 whole hours, or 1 hour and 1 hour, or what?
I think sometimes it's better to start with 1 hour, 1 hour, but there's 2 hours on Saturday and 2 hours on Sunday where you're fully separated from a device. But if ever there's an opportunity to have 2 hours in a row, that would be a massive win. Like if you
Is playing sport just a cheat code for that then? Because if I'm playing paddle, I'm not on my phone for a couple of hours, and then I feel like that's cheating.
It's not cheating. That can be your phone fast. That's like full dosing paddle. You're with people, you're exercising, you've got like the focus of like healthy dopamine. Paddle just magic. Typically anything that's physically active with your friends is magic, because all we did for 300,000 years was run around hunting with our friends. So the paddle is just like a modern example of that, judged into a little box in London. And Yeah, so that's a great use of your phone fast time.
Okay. One of my friends, Spencer Matthews, absolutely swears by this, and I see him do it, and it really winds me up every single day. Cold water immersion.
Yeah.
I'm good at trying most things. I've tried it multiple times. I just can't.
Yeah.
Try and indoctrinate me.
Cold water immersion is super powerful for the dopamine. To put into context, when you have a glass of alcohol, like if you have a glass of wine or you have about 400 mils of beer, your dopamine level will double, and that will occur within 15 minutes of drinking the drink. So you drink the alcoholic drink, within 15 minutes you'll double the amount of dopamine heading towards your reward center, and then after that 15 minutes it begins to fall. In that fall, you then begin to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and your brain goes, make sure you give me another drink, and you get that feeling of like, oh, we're having more drinks tonight. If you take a powerful drug like cocaine, it will 2.5 times the dopamine level, more significant than alcohol, and then it will hit that point within 9 minutes, and then it will begin to fall. And anyone that's interacted with that knows that you feel very good very quickly, and then very quickly you don't feel good and you want more of it, and you go through these big curves.
What about sex?
Sex, probably. I haven't seen a specific research study. I've seen one that looked at like a 200% increase, but it required you to have sex for about 20 minutes. So you need to make sure you're having sex for a while and not getting it done quickly, which porn is kind of training us to do.
Yeah.
And then you look at something like cold water immersion. Cold water is the only thing that can 2.5 times the dopamine, the same as what cocaine can achieve. But because it's acting on a completely different part of the brain, it's a primitive part of the brain that's actually perceiving you're in physical danger, and it's activating dopamine with your nervous system to help you survive a threat effectively. You see that the dopamine actually remains in the brain for about 2.5 hours. So if you think about your day, you're thinking, okay, I really want to attack today. I want to be crazy motivated. I want to be able to get into flow state, get deeply focused on things. It is very useful if cold water has hit your body or your head in the morning. And we kind of, whilst it's really cool if you can get in those cold baths and like absolutely kill yourself in there, if you just do anything that's in the right direction, starting with splashing cold water on your face is a good win. Wake up in the morning, splash cold water on your face. Cold dopamine's still going to go up from that. Having your warm shower and turning it cold for 10 seconds at the end, and not even so cold that you hate your life, but a bit cold that you go, oh, that's cold.
Why at the end?
Because you want your body to go through the thermoregulation of reheating itself. You don't want to do cold, and then you want your body to have the challenge of trying to get itself warm again. Okay. Whereas if you had the cold and then you warmed it back up with the hot water, it's very easy for the body. So if you could end with cold, that'd be great. If that could become 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you can like ease yourself in there. The only other thing I'd add on cold water, because cold water is getting kind of hailed as this phenomenal thing that just serves humans. I actually think if you're in a situation where you're very demotivated and you're apathetic and you can't get yourself going in life, cold water is fantastic. It's going to absolutely surge your dopamine and give you much more like will to do hard things. If you're on the other end of the scale where you're actually doing a lot in your life, you're already working ridiculously hard and you are achieving a lot, and you're leaning more on the burnout side rather than the demotivated side, I don't think cold water serves you in those environments at all. I think it overstresses your nervous system and actually could lead to burnout. And I think if you're on that end of the scale, hot environments, baths, saunas, steam rooms, those all activate your endorphins, which is much more about calming and slowing your system. And I think that's actually a better way to go.
Okay. That's good to hear.
You'll be happy with that.
Yeah, I love a sauna. I love the heat.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to get in those steam rooms, etc. Stick it on for 20 minutes, stick on for 30 if you want to. Like I can handle that.
Cool.
30 seconds in cold water, I'm the world's biggest win.
And I think
I disappoint myself.
You can tactically use these things. You don't have to have just like one routine that's always the same. Like for me right now, because I've just done like 2 months of book touring, I'm leaning heavily towards burnout. Like my brain and body is like, wow, I've been traveling a lot in different time zones and so on. So for me, this evening, for example, a bath or a sauna, that's perfect for my brain because it's going to chill me out. If on Monday I wake up and I think, oh, I've got that really annoying task that I don't want to do, that's then a really good time for me to utilize cold water because it's going to surge some dopamine in my brain, and my capacity to do that hard thing that I don't want to do is going to be easier effectively because I'm going to have more of these molecules sitting there. So you strategically use them dependent on how you're feeling on those particular days.
It's interesting. So I just reread for the nth time Atomic Habits.
Nice.
It's a good January reset.
Get you in the zone.
And obviously James Clear in that talks about cue, habit, reward.
Yeah.
And actually what I'm learning from you sharing this is a lot of this is actually understanding what are you feeling, recognizing what that thing is, and then what is a good almost natural high or, or some kind of solution to try and bring the best out for you in that.
Yeah, 100%.
And so there's these two examples that you've got. So one is, you said, low motivation. Cold water is great.
Yeah.
Overexertion and like too much energy, etc., which is usually the end of the spectrum I'm at. Hot, heat, etc., maybe why I gravitate more that way as well.
Definitely.
What are the other natural highs and other things that we should potentially be looking out for inside our systems?
I would say if you're, this is a really important concept to understand, to bring up, because a lot of the time now, if ever we don't feel good, we feel like something's annoying with work, something's annoying with our partner, we just don't feel good. The basic go is cue, and then it's like straight to the habit of scrolling the phone. It's like, I'm just going to just numb this out, scroll my phone. And then all that does is burn the dopamine out and just leads you feeling even shitter than before. And the useful thing with these brain chemicals is they've got very specific symptoms if you're low in them. So you can learn to listen to the symptoms. So demotivation is low dopamine. Something like really overwhelming stress, frustration type feeling is low endorphins. So you need to try and use things like hot environments. On a different lane, if you were really struggling with like lots of overthinking and anxiety in your brain, that would be very serotonin based. And you'd be thinking, oh, my brain's going really rapidly and it's worrying a lot. Okay, so my serotonin system is low. The best thing you could possibly do for your serotonin, you've got kind of two aspects to it. One is going to be the gut health component. Because 90% of our serotonin is built in the gut, anything that's going to put nutrient-dense molecules into your gut so that your body can use those to build serotonin, magic. So we'd never normally think, for example, oh, I'm overthinking things, so I should eat a healthy meal. That's like, you'd never think, oh, those two things are paired. But biochemically, they're unbelievably paired together. So the nutrient-dense meal would be a component. The other component that we promote so much, and we touched on it earlier, is just headphone-free walks in natural environments. There is nothing better than this. In Japan, there's this great scientist called Keeling who's done a lot of research into forest bathing.
That's one of my favorite discoveries.
Yeah, and they see this massive rise of what's called serum serotonin when you're just in natural environments. And serotonin is this chemical that creates a feeling of peace and contentment in us. And humans spent 300,000 years walking around in a forest. So it's no surprise when we walk in it, our brain experiences peace and contentment. Rather than this perpetual, I need more. Forests give you the opposite. They're just like, oh, okay, I'm just happy with what is. And if your brain is in this rapid overthinking stage, it either needs a nutrient-dense meal, or ideally nutrient-dense meal, and then a walk in nature, no headphones.
Yeah, there's a book I read at Unplugged, actually. So when I went on one of these, it was all very meta. I found a book called Wabi Sabi, which is Japanese philosophy, basically.
Okay.
A Japanese art of slowing down, essentially.
Yes, I have seen that.
And in it, they had a whole chapter on forest bathing.
Cool.
And I did my honeymoon in Japan. I went on a whole forest bathing thing, and it was great. But I hadn't really read about the science of it all. And, it was, like I say, it was so meta. I was in a cabin in the woods, found this book that was in there already about this Japanese forest bathing thing, was like, oh yeah, I kind of did that on my honeymoon, I'll read about it. And then I just went into the forest. And I was just there for like 2-3 hours.
Nice.
It was hard to describe, genuinely, that kind of euphoria that I felt. And it's unbelievable. And I've tried to indoctrinate quite a few friends. It's also, there's a weird process that you do for forest bathing. For anyone listening that wants to give it a go, the very simple way of starting this off is actually you take unbelievably slow steps.
Yeah, you do.
Unbelievably, painfully. You look like, if someone was to film you. Well, this was the only problem, by the way. I wasn't the only person in the woods, and I can tell you, you look like an absolute psycho.
Well, it looks like you're going to kill someone, like slowly 100%, creeping through.
You're not having a normal walk. So if you bump into someone in a forest, they're having a walk, you're having a walk. Hello, how you doing?
Yeah.
You're there.
Oh, you're slowly walking past each other.
And the next step is like 10 seconds later. I mean, honestly, I was terrifying quite a few people. So that's the downside of forest bathing. But the upside is the peace and tranquility and the sounds of the leaves and the sounds of the branches, the sounds of the air. You're so suddenly in tune with all of these natural senses. It's one of the most amazingly connected feelings I've ever had.
Amazing. And in that scenario, your serotonin has gone wild. So this peace has come towards your brain because of the accelerator brake mechanism with dopamine. Dopamine is like, oh, I'm going to chill out for a bit. I don't need to tell this guy, like, he keeps needing to do more. It's like, okay, we're just going to switch off that thinking and we're going to just slow down in this environment. And it's really important to understand, like, especially as an entrepreneur, what can happen is you spend all day hammering technology. And I do this too. It's like smashing through things on my computer, email to messaging, to creating stuff, to editing, to like all of these things. And then in your breaks, you might be spending time on the phone and so on. And then you think, oh, okay, I should go for a walk, or lie in a bath and do nothing. And the thought of that is actually quite horrible because you think, well, it's going to be quite like uncomfortable and like quite, I feel almost too agitated for that. Like I had this last night, like I was like, fuck, I need to try and lie in a bath and chill out because I'd had like we're going through lots of decision making as a company and it's just like a lot for my brain to manage. And I lay in the bath and it's like, oh, it's actually like, I don't feel good in this experience. So it's like, you have to understand that we've been programmed to believe you should feel good immediately when you do something because that's what dopamine in our phones and alcohol and so on have taught us to do. But when you go for the walk or you sit in the bath and you slow down, you have to be prepared that there's like a 15-minute, I call it the boredom barrier. There's like this 15-minute boredom barrier where you think, oh, this is all really horrible. And then slowly your brain, all that noise winds down. Then you enter 3 hours of peace in a forest, for example, is unreal. But it's just important to be prepared for the agitated feeling that it takes to get to the peace.
So you've studied flow state and its relationship with dopamine. And probably for those that don't know, flow state is this sort of magical zone of ultra productivity that all entrepreneurs want to be in all the time.
Yeah.
So how can we help people get into that zone? What do they need to do?
The prerequisite to flow state is you need a good amount of dopamine already sitting in your brain. So if you were to, say, for example, do what we all do, which is sit down at your desk and think, okay, I'm going to get into flow state. Prior to getting into flow state, I'm just going to check what's going on LinkedIn, see if I've got any likes on Twitter, and maybe go on my phone as well. The challenge is you're not just preventing yourself starting the task for 10 minutes, you're actually massively depleting the resource of dopamine in your brain. So then when you go, okay, I'm going to get into flow state, you sit there and you're coming from a lot lower level. And say it takes X in order to get into flow state, you've got a much bigger journey to climb in order to get there. So the first thing is you want to have done something that's slightly effortful. If you're working from home, like if you had just had lunch and like cleaned up your kitchen a bit, a little bit of effort, dopamine's built in your brain. Then you sit down at the desk and whilst you're cleaning in the kitchen, you could think, okay, what is my flow state task going to be? So that you don't have to go and like navigate your whole computer in order to try and identify what it might be. You want to have a game plan in mind before you even sit down. Then you sit down and you just got to absolutely go for it. And you want to make sure that WhatsApp and Slack and email and everything is shut for a period of time. When you're operating with teams, I appreciate you need to try and get that right. It's not that you have to spend all day in flow state. You're just wanting to try and have once a day a period of, say, like 50-ish minutes of deep flow state. That would be a really good number to strive for. So for that period of time, you just write in the team channel, like, I'm going to attempt flow state today at 1 o'clock. So it's like kind of set in stone. Everyone knows they're not going to be able to contact you because you can't access flow state if you're still opening Slack and email and so on. So hard activity first, build up some dopamine, sit down, make sure everyone knows that you're going to be going into flow state, and then just dial in. And there's this thing we call fight the urge, which is very quickly there's going to be a feeling of, I really want my phone. I really want to check LinkedIn notifications. I need some help in order to do this project. I can't do this on my own. There's going to be all these stories that come into your brain that are actually stories that just want dopamine. They don't want you to push through that difficult barrier. And you want to see like getting into flow state as if you're like an artist, for example. An artist wouldn't like sit there with their beautiful canvas in their art studio and do one line and then pick up their phone and do one line and then pick up their phone. They would spend time getting so unbelievably immersed in that project, and eventually they're there and they're in flow state and they're seeing this vision for this idea. That's exactly how it works, even if you're building slides or doing an Excel spreadsheet. Like you want to see yourself as this artist that's creating, that requires just that task and single tasking to access true flow.
Yeah, I actually once interviewed on this podcast John Cleese.
Oh, cool.
And he'd written a book on creativity.
Nice.
And it literally like how to creativity. And his whole thing was, he's like, creativity for me when I was writing Monty Python, when I was writing 40 Towers, doesn't matter. The process was always exactly the same, which is that I would go into my writing room. No one's allowed to talk to me for an hour. My wife isn't allowed to speak to me. The phone's not allowed on the like absolutely no one. And for an hour, I'll just fuck around on whatever I feel like doing.
Nice.
I have absolutely no connection to the internet or a phone or anything. I might be typing, I might be playing some instrument, I might just be chanting, whatever I feel like doing. It's like playtime. And then my 2 hours of my day, which is like ready for pure creativity, I sit at the typewriter and stuff just comes out. And
interesting.
I was like, so interesting. That's how I wrote everything.
That's cool.
And he didn't challenge himself to do more than that. That was the other side of it. It wasn't like I didn't, sometimes I'd write there all day, of course. But actually what I needed really was to get about 2 hours of the ideas out. And the prep before was the most important part. Without the prep, I could never get the good ideas out.
Yeah, he's just like allowing his brain to just get out of that dopamine urge effectively of it's spending an hour just chilling out, doing present experience type activities, and then he's sitting down and that like need for other things is reduced because you just settled the brain, and then it's like boom, straight in. And as writing a book, if you actually got 2 hours of deep focus a day, you'd smash out a book in no time.
Yeah, true.
But a lot of the time when you're writing a book, it's like a little bit and then this and that and this and that, and then it takes all day. And it's so much better for our brain as an entrepreneur to just get into these deep states of focus and then allow our brain to rest, then deep states of focus and then rest, rather than just like feeling as though it's a productive thing to do to just work from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, but just like kind of go between everything the whole time. Really intentional usage of your time like you're an athlete effectively is the goal.
So what is the one brain chemistry molecule or intervention that you would advise that's shown the most dramatic impact on productivity and focus?
I think it would be so hard for me to effectively pick between developing a good phone fasting practice, prioritizing the sleep, or the headphone-free walks in nature. And those three things, I think those are the most fundamental thing for an entrepreneur. Physical separation from the phone, headphone-free walks in nature to solve all your problems and create solutions, and then increasing the quantity of sleep so that the domino of good sleep falls and all your decision-making gets better. And I don't know which one I'd start with. Whichever one of those feels when you listen to it like intuitively, like, yeah, I need to do that thing. I would say that's your answer.
Fair enough, because when people ask me about tips for entrepreneurs, etc., my number one piece of advice, and maybe because I had depression, anxiety, a lot of mental health problems, my number one piece of advice is go for a walk.
Yeah, interesting.
It's my number one mental health advice, because it's the thing that made the biggest impact to me in my life, and everything felt like downstream from just going for a walk.
And did you go on your phone much on those walks?
Listening to Audible and podcasts and stuff, not like endless scrolling, because obviously I appreciate that gets in the way of the purpose of going for a walk.
Yeah.
But I have to say it was just about making sure that I'm physically in nature. Mm-hmm. I'm in a park, I'm seeing dogs, like other people. It's a nice thing to do, rain or shine as well.
Yeah.
You're moving your body.
Yeah.
Regardless, that's a good thing for your mental health. Obviously your physical health too, but it's just a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. And you're also getting yourself out of your physical environment, which at the end of the day, especially you said you'd had depression as well. When you are depressed, the last thing you want to do is leave your house.
For sure.
So forcing yourself out of your house, basically going for a walk solves a lot of other things that are getting in the way of your overcoming your depression.
100%.
So it's sort of like, without micromanaging how do I get out of depression or how do I stop feeling less anxious, it's like, you know what? Going for a walk solves so many of the things that are stopping you over here that for me, I was like, I can't believe how miraculously helpful just going for a walk is.
Interesting. I mean, we're a big believer at D.O.S.E Lab in steps, like in terms of just making sure that you hit 10,000 steps a day. And it's not actually that easy to hit 10,000 steps a day.
No, I do 10,000 a day pretty much every day, and it's a lot of walking.
You have to consciously get yourself to walk. Like today, I got a train into Waterloo, and it was like 40 minutes or something to get here. And obviously, I could have just got a tube and got here like in a second. And then I walked it because it gets the steps. I think it got me like 2.8k or something. Not that I'm tracking it. And yeah, I think steps in itself is super powerful. For context, hunter-gatherers were averaging about 35,000 steps a day. And
that's a bit much.
We're now like sort of averaging about 6. So
I mean, just to say, I did 50,000 one day at Glastonbury.
Yeah,
and
you had some additional support.
And it's not really possible to do more than that because I was pretty much walking the whole entire day.
Yeah.
It was the most I've ever done in a day, and I've done hiking holidays and all sorts, and 50,000 was absolutely the peak of that's how much one can walk in a day. So 35,000 is insane.
They were just cruising that every day. And obviously that's not then the goal, like do 35,000 a day, but it just puts into context.
What do you reckon they were tracking it on?
The people that have gone and hunted with them. So there's this guy called, there's a show called Primal Survivor, and he goes with them, and then he just spends their days, but he's being tracked. And when he spent their normal days, he was getting 35,000 a day.
That's mad, isn't it?
And the other thing that steps are so significant on is the more like physically exhausted your body is, the better it then sleeps. And you mentioned you sleep quite well, you fall asleep quite quickly.
But I was a former insomniac.
And you're a former insomniac. Do you think the walking impacted that? Have you ever seen a connection between when you started doing the increased walking?
Not necessarily, because I had depression before I had insomnia. So depression and the walking stuff came from solving that. And a few years later, I had insomnia.
And then when did the sleep get better?
It's nutrition. That's why I started Heights. So
okay.
I
so
had
it's like your serotonin eventually started thriving.
So I had obviously just nutrition depletion. And my brain wasn't getting the nutrients that it needed. And I just didn't know any of that stuff. And I went to sleep labs and all sorts of things to be like, what is going on with me? And in the end, went to see a dietitian.
And that actually solved your sleep. That's super interesting. Super interesting. And we need this serotonin molecule in order to build melatonin, which puts us to sleep at night. And if your gut wasn't thriving, then you wouldn't have been building much serotonin.
Exactly. 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut, like you say.
That's cool. That's a good reason to have built the company.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a sort of, I guess, not too similar to you in that sense, because you seem quite directional and purposeful. But, like I said, I was running a mobile app company. I had no awareness of this stuff at all until it happened to me, and was like, wow, what? I had no idea. You said it earlier yourself. No idea that nutrition could have any impact on any of this stuff whatsoever. It was a complete epiphany to me.
I think that's such a big part of entrepreneurship, is solving your own pain. I also saw this great quote that the amount of income you generate is directly proportional to the problem you solve in the world. And for you, you're now solving a significant problem for people in the world of serious nutrient deficiency. And then the income of heights has been fantastic. And I think in entrepreneurship, it's so useful to consider things down that lane. Like this oxytocin chemical is a chemical that we experience when we feel love. And the greatest way, according to this research scientist called Algo, to increase it is through contributing to other human beings. Like whenever you serve the group, effectively it goes up. And evolutionarily, that obviously just makes a ton of sense. And I think it's really important in entrepreneurship to think about how is this idea serving our world in some way. And then for those people that find they struggle with their ambition and their want for more, it's really important to regularly acknowledge in your mind the service you are already doing. So for you, like, it's really important, like when you're going to sleep at night, just to think like, wow, it's so cool that all these people are taking these supplements and that's really helping their health and so on. That feeling and that thought process will bring on oxytocin, which is very settling for the brain. And then it kind of puts the moment of, I need more customers, like that feeling of I want to serve more. It just lets it rest for a little bit. That can always come back. But considering and acknowledging your contribution is key.
Many people use things like, caffeine or alcohol, not just to cure their own social anxiety, but, to be with other people, right? To exist with other people in a comfortable state. Like we said, we're quite comfortable doing this because we'll have a certain personality type and we're practiced. But for other people, they'll use those stimulants in order to almost survive those moments, right? And those kind of interactions. So how do we square that off? Like, what kind of impact does using substances for socializing have on your ability to manage dopamine and D.O.S.E?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, they vary between the substances. Something like alcohol is definitely like a very strong social lubricant, effectively. And alcohol will progressively like inhibit a lot of the function of your prefrontal cortex so that you get less analytical when you're drinking it. And effectively, like as our brain was evolving from like reptilian brain right at the core of the root of our brain, then it evolved into mammalian brain and then the human brain with this front bit. This front bit gave us the ability to deeply analyze our experience, which is why humans have evolved to what we have, because we have this capacity to think so deeply on things. When you drink the alcohol, it switches off that front bit of your brain a little, which means you kind of, effectively you're devolving your brain a little bit when you're drinking, but it's just meaning a lot of the noise calms down. And I think that's why, for example, in a social setting where you feel awkward or uncomfortable, alcohol can be so useful in those scenarios. The only thing to understand is that because it's switching something off, then it has to switch itself back on. And that's sometimes why when we drink, we have this peaceful experience during and then an over-analytical brain the next day that gets more and more worried. So it's just important to recognize, okay, so it's switching it off, but it also is switching it back on. But I mean, a little bit of alcohol, if it was really serving you socially, like that could be manageable depending on how addictive you find it.
Fair enough. You've said, and you said this before we started, most entrepreneurs don't fail because of strategy. They fail because of execution. So what do they need to learn to master to get over that problem?
I think you need to build really solid routines with yourself that are non-negotiable routines. I think something like, for me, meditation really serves me, but it's like the most ridiculously difficult habit to build, meditation, because it's just like an uncomfortable experience meditating and you think, I don't have time for it. And there's like a million reasons to not meditate. And for me, the only way I've successfully managed to get meditation to happen is I do it as soon as I wake up in the morning. Like, it's nothing comes first, it's just that. And because I've got such a non-negotiable routine with it, I've managed to get it to happen. Whereas if it was I'll meditate like sometime before work. Like maybe I'll do the walk, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll like hang out with my girlfriend for a bit. Then it's just never going to be consistent. So that's a niche example of the routine is non-negotiable. And I think wherever your priority is that you're wanting to execute on, you need to pick some foundational routines that become non-negotiable that serve that goal effectively.
Okay, because you mentioned that you get a dopamine hit from planning. And not so much execution, or how does that actually
It's not that you do get it from the execution. You get like a massive healthier level of dopamine from the execution, but the challenging component is you're effectively getting quick dopamine from just telling people about the idea, or just like in your head dreaming about the idea. Like we're working on this school project at the moment, which is going to enable D.O.S E to be much more scalable within schools. And when I was telling the whole team about it, I was getting this huge dopamine rush, like, oh, wow, this feels so exciting. And I felt really, really good in that moment. And it's almost easy to then feel like, wow, I've done it then, because your brain is experiencing this rewarding. It's like a hunter-gatherer sitting there in the tribe and like really clearly describing how good the deer is that they're going to find today, but they're not going out and actually getting the deer. And it's just very important to make sure, of course, dream, but don't just spend your life telling people your dreams. It's very important to be much more disciplined on focusing on the actions required in order to attain the dream. And I found that early on in my career, I was a bit too much of a dreamer, effectively. I was just like saying all these things I was going to do, but not necessarily doing them. And I think it's better to actually sometimes not tell people all your goals and then tell them once you've achieved the goal and say, oh yeah, it's really cool. We've managed to build this thing. Like even that school project, me saying it out loud, my brain's like, oh, cool, but I haven't yet done it. It's very important to actually take action rather than just talk about the goals.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance to be had there though, because a lot of the time an entrepreneur's job is chief storyteller.
Yeah.
Bringing people along for the ride. And you were talking about the different types of brains. Part of the prefrontal cortex and the human side of the brain is our ability to tell stories. And that is one of the most fundamentally, unique evolutionary advantages that human brains have, which can be weaponized for lies as well.
Yeah.
But we are able to tell a story about a vision of a thing we're going to create, which creates an opportunity for people to collaborate over something that doesn't yet exist.
100, and that's a beautiful skill for sure. And there are different people within organizations that serve different roles. It's just very important to also be an executor, effectively. Not one that kills people like a Pirates Caribbean, but someone that executes on the task. And you don't just want to spend your time like hyping up a team and then not having the systems in place that make that a reality. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Okay. We've talked about a lot today. So if we were to implement your approach, the whole D.O.S E system, how do you think our life would change?
I think you would finally be in control of how motivated you feel each day, which is massive in entrepreneurship, to not be living on this massive fluctuating path. And your capacity to do the hard things is easier once the dopamine is stabilized. And then I think the whole other lens of this conversation is you might actually be able to feel some peace at times as well. And I think that's like the hardest emotion for an entrepreneur to experience. There's this capacity where D.O.S E is going to serve you in keeping motivated and doing the hard things, but then it's also going to enable you to have times where you're actually out of that world and you just feel peaceful and more content and more grateful for what you have done at the same time.
Do you feel like most entrepreneurs really exist in a state of either ambition or peace? Is there some like beautiful middle ground for those?
I think we're just living in ambition as entrepreneurs and not much peace. And I think peace should be a really important priority. If you have really long-term ambition where you want your business or to build for years and then sell and build another one, or you want to build this business for decades, I think the idea of like peaceful progress, of like making sure that it's not just like chase, but you're slowly building, is super important to consider. And the more peace you experience and the kind of more your nervous system is allowed to rest, the better you're going to be as a high-performing athlete or entrepreneur. You can see them as basically the same thing. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. And a really important message to get out into the world.
For sure.
Okay. So where can people find you? Where can they find out more about your work? Where can they get your book?
Yeah, so at TJ Power on Instagram is my kind of best platform. The irony of sharing content on there is kind of funny. And then thedoselab.com is where you can join D.O.S E, track your brain chemicals, and the book is called The D.O.S E Effect.
Amazing. TJ, thank you so much for joining us on Secret Leaders.
Thanks for having me.